Welcome, everyone. Hope it's you're appreciating the rain instead of the snow today. So today, I'm filling in for Melanie, who's a fantastic colleague, and I'm sure this presentation will be a lot better, but let's see if we can have some fun. This topic, from mission to metrics, you might be wondering, why do we have a non-accounting presentation here in the middle of this? And really, if you were listening to the last presentation on fund statements, it's the same reasons, right? The accountability to donors, accountability to grant makers, accountability to your board and those who are exercising oversight. It's all the same reason. But even more important is because you want to have numbers in those 990s. You want to have numbers in those audits. You want to have numbers in your financial statements. And to get those numbers, you have to raise that money. And we know that you know what it's like to do your day-to-day job. You know what it's like to help people's lives. You know what it's like to help get that pet adopted. You know what it's like to feed that family. You know what it's like to help that person get that first job, perhaps. But how do you explain what you're doing in your everyday work to somebody who's a bit removed? Somebody a little bit like me, right? A donor. I'm a donor. I'm a volunteer, or a fund manager of a foundation who's going to be figuring out whether or not to award a grant to your organization. So that's really what we're here to talk about today, and the importance of incorporating metrics. And there's one thing that I'll repeat. Somebody who's a legend in this community, B. Gonzalez, likes to say, I hope you, if you're around B, I hope it's okay if I quote you, that stories move the heart and data move the head. And a lot of this is going to be talking about how do you move both the head and the heart to get people to be part of your mission, to donate, to volunteer, to be on your board, and to make grants to you. So that's the topic for today, for this session, from mission to metrics, building a stronger case for impact. So that being said, just a little bit, you had a bio about me, but the perspective that I'm really going to take here is that perspective of someone who's a bit separated from your mission, somebody who's a potential donor, a potential grant maker. I volunteer with a lot of nonprofits. Assume I'm not a volunteer at your organization. And so this cartoon kind of gets to it. You have Charlie Brown, and I think it's Linus, saying, I think Linus saying, when I get big, I want to be a great philanthropist. And then Charlie's saying, well, you have to have a lot of money to be a great philanthropist. And he thinks for a second, he says, well, I want to be a great philanthropist with someone else's money. And so we get a chuckle out of that, because really that's what philanthropic professionals are. We are people who are professionals, and what we do for a living is we help honor people's legacies long after they die. And so it could be 100 years since someone's death, and we're still looking at the things they cared about in their life and giving out money for those activities. And so that's the type of person, that's the type of audience that oftentimes this is for, as well as, of course, your living donors and volunteers. And so this is important because you want to move the head and you want to move the heart, and you want to encourage these people to make contributions to be part of your mission. So a little bit of an overview of this. So why metrics matter? Because you want to move the head and the heart, right? The stories are very important, and I think people are good at storytelling, but you can be better at storytelling when you connect the numbers and the story. Because soon after telling a story about an impactful event that happened, or working with a client and how their life really changed, the donor, the grant maker wants to know, well, how widespread is that? Is that just one person? Is that a one-off? Or is that something that really happens to a lot of people? Second important is connecting mission to measurement. You really want to measure things that are about the central core things of what you do. And we'll talk about that, and not sort of going down rabbit holes of things that are easier to measure, but really don't speak to what makes your organization unique and makes your organization the best place to donate, the best place to serve on the board, the best place to volunteer, or to make a grant. So storytelling, as I'm mentioning, is very important, and it's connected to those KPIs, those key performance indicators. You want to think about how you're going to tell that story. What's the story behind those numbers as you're doing that? And we'll give some examples as we go. And then you want to align those with your strategic goals. It's not just your mission, but where you want to go as an organization. What types of things do you see changing in the community with your organization when it's fully funded, when it's fully operational, you're fully staffed, and you have all the resources that you need to do that work? And then we'll get into some practical tools for immediate use, things like logic models and dashboards. Take a look at those, because oftentimes they say when you're learning another language, say you're doing learning French or Spanish or Farsi or something like that, you really know it when you start dreaming in that language, and really to start getting fluid and fluent with this type of KPIs. You want to see a lot of examples. I would really recommend looking at examples, looking at peers. So you start dreaming in these terms, and you start thinking, oh, this is how we could show our impact. And then you can start moving toward doing it and carrying it out. So we're going to start then with the challenge. The challenges that nonprofits have, basically because they do work. We know, I do a lot of site visits, volunteer a lot of organizations. And this is an amazing community. This is Central New York. There's 5-county region. I know that you're broader than that as well here on the audience. We do a lot of amazing things, and people day in and day out come and they give it their all in nonprofits. But it's often very difficult to summarize that for someone. And if you're a donor, you know this. There are many, many people reaching out to you, asking for donations, and it's hard to sort them out. It's how to figure out, you only have so much to give. Same thing if you're a philanthropy. Even the largest philanthropy in your community probably can only fund about 17% of the amount of money requested. So it really is competitive. So we oftentimes have a problem where there's many activities. You might have, if you're a small nonprofit with a few staff, one CEO, and maybe some volunteer staff, you might describe yourself as a chief cook and bottle washer, right? Meaning I do everything in this organization, and we hear that a lot. And everything means a lot when you're living in the moment and you're serving all the clients that you have. But it's hard to explain. It's hard to count, and oftentimes this leads to inconsistent data collection. You have many organizations. I walk in, I'll say, "Oh, what's your data?" And they have Post-it notes here and there and things like that, or a bunch of disconnected spreadsheets, or some stories that really don't have any backup evidence, not only about the actual incident, the actual point of service, the actual life that was changed, but also about how widespread that is. And that's very, very important, right? If you are good at helping people's lives improve, right? You want to know that you can do this for a lot. And everyone knows that story about the little boy walking along the seashore, picking up all these starfish that have washed up, right? And somebody's walking saying, "There's millions of starfish here. How are you can't possibly save all these starfish. How can what you are doing matter?" And the boy picks up one and throws it, and he says, "Well, it mattered to that one, right?" He's returning these starfish that have washed up on shore back to the water where they can live and survive. And so that's an example of a story that moves the heart, right? You really can help out, that starfish. But when that's moving the heart, but when you want to move the head, you want to be able to say, well, how many starfish did we actually get in? How long does it take to get them in there? What is their survival rate when they get back in? And those things start to matter when you're competing with others who are also returning starfish into the ocean, right? So your metrics start to matter, or perhaps somebody who says, we're returning, clams to the ocean, right? Something like that. And so really it is a market out there, and those metrics really need to be connected to your mission. And so it's clear what you're doing and how your organization really fills a niche that no one else does. So why metrics matter? They strengthen fundraising, right? If you're able to say, this is that story about starfish, and this is how many people we help in this way, it really helps with fundraising. It improves the programs. You're able to hire better staff. You're able to train those staff. You're able to take best practices from your high-performing staff and transfer those to others. Builds trust within the community. When people can see, when you're transparent about what you're doing, not just when you are doing well, but also when you're doing poorly and not hitting those key performance indicators, as we'll get into, that's also builds trust. And that's a secret that you might not know. And for me, 17-ish years working in the field of philanthropy, can say it builds trust just as much when you tell the truth about what you're not achieving. So, we tried to get these 20 people jobs and we only got 7, and here's why, and we think we're doing this wrong. That builds a lot of trust. Just as it would in a relationship when you're honest, right? So building trust is important. So measuring isn't just about telling a good story. It's about telling the true story. It's about showing that you are committed to the outcomes of your clients more than you're committed to just raising funds or keeping your organization going. It shows that you care about the mission more than you care about the institutional structure that you built to achieve that mission. And that's what donors and funders really want to see. So you want to demonstrate that accountability. Absolutely. You want to be able to show your board what you're doing. You want to be able to reallocate. And they say in the entrepreneurial world, fail early, fail fast. It's not that different in the social entrepreneurial world. When you're working with people in the community to help make their lives better, it's not easy, right? It's not as easy as selling widgets or counting widgets. you're really dealing with all the things in their life, right? You've heard of this, the social determinants of health, right? So if you're just trying to make their health better, you've got housing, you've got gun violence, you've got lead poisoning, you've got exhaust, you've got all sorts of things. It's a complex world out there. And so what works is going to be complex. And this allows you to show we're really interested in failing and failing fast so that we can get quicker to a better solution. So demonstrating that accountability is very important. Also, guiding your strategic decisions. Sometimes you're going to hit on something that really works, that's really popular. There are constantly changing needs in the community. And so if you're able to show these metrics, you're able to say, you know what? The people coming in don't need this anymore. We're going to shift over to another line of service. Or we've been trying to get people jobs for a long time, but it's not working because we don't have childcare. Well, maybe we need to pair and bundle childcare, which you heard about in the last presentation, with the job training programming. And so it'll help you in those ways when you gather these metrics. So, all right, so on to our first question. First question of this presentation: which of the following is not a reason that metrics matter? Is it because it would strengthen fundraising? Is it because it would improve programs? Is it because it would remove barriers to data collection? Is it because it would build trust within the community? Or is it because it would demonstrate accountability? Or finally, guide strategic decisions? So which of these is not a reason that metrics matter? I'm telling you that metrics do matter. They help to move the head along with the heart. And so which one of these is not a reason that they matter and not a reason that we're articulating? It'd be helpful. If you're not doing it now, start doing it. And you've got 5 seconds left. I think people are responding. Mm-hmm. Okay, they are. Oh my gosh. All right. All right, so which of the following is not a reason that metrics matter? So it's not the first one, strengthening fundraising, because if done right, it can. It certainly can also help you improve your programs and build trust in the community and demonstrate accountability and guide strategic decisions. So yes, most of you picked remove barriers to data collection. So now that I've told you it's good, are there barriers to actually doing it? There are, right? So many of you pointed out that just knowing that this is helpful doesn't remove the barriers, and there are barriers. So next, we're going to turn into what are some of these barriers to data collection. So the next slide, we'll shoot over. The first thing is people often they aren't necessarily aligned always with their mission. Sometimes you hear this called mission creep or mission drift, and that's oftentimes looking for grant money, right? It's a fact of life that you need money to keep the lights on, keep the staff here. And oftentimes what we end up doing is looking for what grants are out there and then going for those, right? And so the key things to remember in this is that you want to align your activities with your mission objective. So you don't want to go for monies that aren't aligned with that. It's hard. It's a stiff discipline, and sometimes it can mean that your organization is shrinking at certain times. And so that's something really you want to perhaps sometimes change your mission if there isn't a market. Second, you want to identify measurable outcomes, which we'll get into, and a lot of this is going to be showing you examples of measurable outcomes and right-sizing those measurable outcomes, picking ones that really hone in on what you do, because sometimes people say, well, I don't serve individuals, I serve the whole community. Well, there are outcomes for that as well. And use data to tell the story of impact. So there's the mixture of data and storytelling. You want to pair those together and almost use the data as the skeleton, right? Use that skeleton and then put flesh on that so people can really see, oh, I see, it looks like a human, and I see what the flesh looks like as well. So you're really using that metaphor, filling in the skeleton of the data with the actual stories, and then ensuring relevance to stakeholders, right? Making sure that what you're doing, the stories you're telling, the things you're measuring are relevant to those donors, those volunteers, those board members, those grant makers. So those are the first things. So one thing that you often see is a process. This process, if you've done any sort of evaluation, or if you've ever run a program, this is a very popular process. This is the results-oriented management and accountability cycle. So everything I share here kind of assumes that this cycle is going on. And the first thing at the very top is assessing what the community needs. You can see how that is a part of accountability to the stakeholders, because you're looking to see what are the needs of the community right now, not when this organization began, and you're looking to modify what you do in relation to those needs. So you might notice Micron is coming to your town, maybe a big company is coming to your city, and something that you didn't realize before is now a big need, like housing. Oh my gosh, we need a lot of housing. We need a lot of childcare. We need STEM programs to help kids get into those jobs, right? So those assessment of needs, that's very important. We'll get into that in a moment. Lead into a planning, what my organization is going to do. It really should relate to your mission statement, or you need to maybe revise your mission statement. You don't want to do that too much, but you want to sort of make sure that you're always doing things that are aligned with that. Then leads to figure out what your implementation plan is going to be. What are you going to do, right? You can't do everything, right? You're just one organization, but you'll notice that we'll get into something called the logic model later on. Things like logic models can be very helpful in figuring out what strategies you're going to engage in to get the results that you want to see to really address those needs that you identified in the assessment. Then the next step is achieving results, and that's achieved through, you figure out what exactly is happening. You start measuring things, and then you get into evaluation, which is the last part of this. You're analyzing data to compare that against benchmarks to figure out, are we really getting as many people employed as we thought we could with this approach? And at that point, two things could be wrong. One, your theory could be wrong. Maybe giving people a car or childcare isn't enough to get them into employment. Or two, maybe you're giving them broken cars. Maybe you're not giving them satisfactory childcare, right? So it could be the theory's wrong, or it could be the way that you're implementing the theory. So evaluation is helpful for both of those things in evaluating data. Wanted to throw this out there because this is very important for community action programs. They're in every community across the country, and this is really something that the federal government and others have embraced and put forth as an approach. The thing I do want to point out, though, is when you're looking at evaluation, right, that last part that I pointed out, it's really critical that you identify the right things to evaluate. And you can see here with this image, right, you've got all sorts of arrows pointing to this one thing, that one red dot. What's that one thing that you really care about, that your organization does better than anyone else, that you're going to focus your efforts on? It could be getting people out of poverty, getting people out of homelessness. It could be getting stray animals into a loving home. It could be helping people just find their next meal and ending food insecurity. It could be helping youth explore reading, or what their love of books or animals. That one thing is what you need to be crystal clear about. And you need to focus not on the outputs, which is how many people you serve or how many children you serve. If you think of yourself as a computer or maybe a machine making widgets, making widgets, how many widgets you make, right? That was my impression of a machine, right? And used to have a professor that was saying, the world is a machine. He had a very strong accent. The world is a machine. And I was like, yeah, it's a machine. What does the machine do? What the machine does is make widgets. That's outputs. That's how many people you serve, how many meals you serve. That's helpful in talking about how the machine is running. But what you really care about is, does that machine serve a useful purpose, right? You've heard about these machines that are whimsical, that kind of do funny things, that they don't do, they work nice and smoothly, but they don't actually make something of value in the world. That's something of value in the world. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about an outcome. An outcome isn't just somebody's getting meals served. It's how many people have food security now? How many people are not malnourished? How many people are no longer homeless? How many people have a job? How many people are thriving? How many people are moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that? If you're not, I'll show a slide in a little while that talks about that. And that's what we really care about, people's lives changing. And that's, that you might say, well, how does this relate to my audit, my 980? It does, because when you're able to tell this story, the rest of that is about how well you do what you do. But nobody wants to give to you if you don't do something that they care about, right? So that really points out that these also have to be measurable. You also have to be able to quantify them. And we'll talk about how you do that in a moment. And aligning those with your strategic goals of where you see the organization going and where your organization fits into the broader fabric of the community, right? We're an ecosystem. Just like if you go to Baltimore Woods, if you go to your favorite nature place, you'll notice that the birds, right, the flora, the fauna, they all kind of work together in an ecosystem. Where do you fit into that ecosystem? So not trying to do everything right here, not trying to take credit for what other organizations do, but being really clear about your contribution, right? I'm a bee, I pollinate, right? That's what I do. All day long, I pollinate. Well, not all year long, right, but all day long when in season, right? So you're clear about that. mission statement should also say what you do, what you don't do, right? So you're prioritizing what matters most for your stakeholders. So let's get into that. So KPIs, they can help you measure performance. They can help you once you are clear about that. And then we're going to get into some examples in a moment, right? So if you have never seen a performance measure, a key performance indicator, I've given you some hints as to what they are. It could be the number of children who receive books and are improving their reading, the number of people who get jobs, the number of dogs who now are in a loving home, right? That's a KPI. So these can be used to measure performance. You can use this to measure who are your top performers, who are you going to reward, and more importantly, who are you going to encourage others to emulate? For instance, I really love the way you work with those in the methadone clinic with people who have meth addictions. You really connect with them. I love how you're doing it, and I can see it in the declining rate in which they're using drugs. And then you're not only praising that employee, but you're then saying, what are your secrets? And you're generalizing that, and then kind of spreading that around to others. You're going to expand that to other staff. It can help you align your strategy and actions, and help staff do that. Well, they say measure what you treasure, and they say if a tree falls in the wilderness and there's no one there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? Same kind of thing. If you do something great and no one measures it, did you actually do it? Right? You did. That's the answer, is you did. But it's not, the donors don't know you did it, right? The volunteers don't know you did it. The board doesn't know you did it. And so this helps staff to align their actions, right? And they, hopefully, when you build these, you pull them into the process and allow them the opportunity to say, I think this key performance indicator is not quite right. How about we tweak it this way? And you say, yeah, how about we tweak it that way? And you do that collaboratively so that you are building in the wisdom from the frontline staff, the staff that are working with people day in and day out, because that's where a lot of the wisdom and a lot of the theory really can be built. So aligning, and it helps them align their actions. You're facilitating decision-making, again, with those staff, the program managers, the frontline staff, and the C-suite. What should we focus on, right? What are we doing well? Motivate those employees and identify new opportunities, right? Some risks, though. Sometimes you can pick inappropriate indicators or things that people don't understand, and they end up doing the wrong thing. Why are you doing that? Well, because the indicator said so. Well, that points out you really need to develop these indicators with people, right? You need to have as part of a conversation. Or maybe have two indicators. I was part of an initiative, and I said, I'm glad to join this initiative. What are we doing? And I don't want to say the name of it, but they said, this is what we're doing. And they produced a list of about 40 data points, 40 indicators. And I just looked at it, and it was like, I got a little dizzy. It was kind of like, if you're old enough, you remember in the newspaper, they used to have something called the magic eye. It was just a bunch of blurry colors. And you look at those, and if you look long enough, a shape pops out. And you can say, oh, that's a camel, right? It was a little bit like that. It was overwhelming. It had this sort of narcotizing effect where I didn't know what to focus on. And so too many indicators is also a problem. So don't overmeasure, right? Only measure something that you're going to use in decision-making. So if you look at something and somebody's saying, should we keep this in the database? You could say, well, have we ever made a decision on that before? Have we ever looked at that number and said, let's go left or right? And if you never have, say, are we ever going to? If the answer is probably not, get rid of it. Don't waste people's time. People know when their time is being wasted. And if your time is wasted, what are you going to do? Probably the same thing as me. I'm going to say, you know what? They're wasting my time. Nobody's looking at this data, and I'm going to do this, but 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. People start entering stuff. You get sloppy data. I wouldn't encourage that. I wouldn't do that, but there's a temptation, right? So don't overmeasure. There's a chance that things can be misaligned, right? That data can be manipulated. You want to make sure that you are using those data to capture what's actually happening, right? There's a big debate about whether SATs, right, or GREs actually, or standardized tests actually measure intelligence or learning, right? And so that's a debate about whether the tool is actually managing what they're saying, right? So that's something you want to really think about. Do those measures measure what you actually say you're measuring? And it's called face validity and things like that in the academic world. So pressured by KPIs often involves stress. Sometimes you don't want to stress out your staff, right? This should be an opportunity to learn, and you should celebrate, right? And they do this in the Navy. They do this in a lot of places. Let's celebrate our failures. Let's have an after-action review and talk about what didn't work, because it's more important that we figure out what didn't work than that we hide it and sweep it under the rug and keep doing it, right? So this shouldn't be something that causes stress among staff, right? It's a team sport. There's a team goal, right? It's not about firing your kicker after. Oops, sorry, is it too soon for that for the Bills fan? Sorry about that. Anyway, I don't want the crowd to turn against me here. All right. So anyway, only figures. You also want to make sure you're also measuring what's not measurable. So conversation and stories, as we'll talk about, are important as well. All right. You've probably heard this before, so I'm going to fly through this. Just wanted to be in the slides. What you measure should be SMART, which is specific, right? It should be something that's pretty precise. It should be measurable, something that you can actually ask people, something that you can collect data on, and something that's achievable. You actually can get it to happen, something that's relevant. It has to do with your mission, as we were talking about, and something that's time bound. It's set a deadline for how long it will take. So if you were to say, you know what we're going to do in this nonprofit that we're going to resettle lost dogs, right? There's a lot of dogs that are walking around and they're lonely and they don't have families. And what's our KPI? We're gonna, when we get these dogs in the homes, we're going to bring about world peace. You say, what? Is that specific? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're gonna solve a conflict somewhere? Like, what part of the world? Is it measurable? How are you gonna know if you did it? You're gonna ask the dog owners? Is it achievable? Like, is that within your reach? Is it relevant? I mean, that's not really in our mission statement. And is it time bound? Like, maybe it's possible that if you get enough dogs into people's households, the level will increase so much that eventually people will lose their desire to war, and we will bring about peace. But you can see that's not a smart example, right? Something, and oftentimes we don't go that high, but we do kind of. We say, I'm going to end poverty. I'm going to end homelessness. I'm going to make these children have great professional lives. Well, they're 4 years old. How are you going to do that? It's not time bound, right? You're not going to be able to follow them for 20 years. Right. So what oftentimes we mean by this is picking something that's sort of on the way to that long-term goal. You may want them to have great professional lives, but what you have to do is then say, well, what literature says is if you thrive in school, you'll have a great professional lives. And then what literature says is to thrive in school, you need to be able to read by third grade. When they stop learning how to read and they start requiring you to read in order to learn, that's where they stop teaching you this is how to do the phonics and sound it out. And that's where they say, here's the history chapter, read the textbook and learn. So you might say, oh, all right, I'm at 3 and 4 years old. I'm not going to get them to the profession. So that's not a smart measurement. But I can say, you know what? I'm going to get them reading on grade level by third grade, right? That is within, it's specific, right? You have a test for it. It's measurable. It's achievable. It's relevant to what you're doing. Say your literacy program, your book distributions, right? And it's time bound. You can measure that by third grade. Or maybe if that is too long a time, you might say, you know what, I'm going to bring it back to kindergarten readiness because that predicts third grade reading. And third grade reading predicts high school graduation. High school graduation predicts college, predicts career, right? So you can use literature to do it. You can have lofty goals. I'm not saying don't try to bring about those goals that you dream about. Just when you pick your measures, be very specific about where it fits into that chain of events, right? So that's a smart measure. All right. So you might be thinking, where am I going to find these measures? Well, I mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you've never heard of Maslow, don't worry. This is what it is. It's a hierarchy of needs, a pyramid that starts on the bottom with your basic needs. And the basic premise of this is if you don't have the lower needs met, you can't move on to the upper needs, right? So for instance, I'll look at this, I'll say, you know what? I'll look at the top of the pyramid on the left. I really want to transcend myself. I want to self-actualize myself. I want to be, as a sergeant used to say, I don't want you to be, I had a sergeant, I won't tell his name. He said, you know what, you gotta pictualize where you want to be, right? Picture yourself and actualize yourself. You want to be all you can be. And as Sarge, I can't do that when my feet are freezing, when I don't have food, right? That's the physiology, right? And so you have this sense where you got to do the bottom. You have to have food. You have to have a house. You have to have a roof over your head, shelter, before you then get into safety and security. And then you need to belong before you can have self-esteem. And you got to have that self-esteem before you can start learning and have this cognitive advancement. And then you move into aesthetic and self-transcendence. So the idea is you need to get the bottom in order to get to the top. And so why am I going into psychology and Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Really because this is a nice crosswalk into what your program does when you're thinking about your mission, right? Kind of talking about the niche that you serve in this community. So maybe you have to do with physiological, you do proper nutrition, or you do housing. Maybe you do school and neighborhood safety, you're in safety. Maybe if you're in belongingness, you do community programs, or self-esteem, you do empowerment programs. This all comes from Arthur Brooks, former professor at SU, I think he's at Harvard now. This is from his textbook. I see the citations not visible here, so I want to give credit there. But maybe it's aesthetic, so you help people with the arts, right? And etc. Or maybe self-transcendence, and you help to create mentor programs when you're measuring the effect on the mentors and the mentees. And so this gives you an example, and you might say, all right, well, I got a sense of you've got these basic needs that tells you where you fit in the niche in this larger organism of the community, right? And I got a sense for where my organization fits. The next step is to take this and then translate it from these needs and these solutions to what actually might KPIs look like. And so here you got a bunch of examples, right? So your physiological needs is your food, your drink, your oxygen, your temperature regulator, your elimination, rest, activity, right? And safety needs, protection from dangerous objects, situations. Maybe it could be, lead poisoning, things like that. So when you look at this, you can kind of get a sense of, all right, what could I maybe measure? And more on that as we go. I'd say the hardest part of all of this is not the technical parts, it's picking your measures. Really it is. Once you've got your measures, other people can show you how to do it, right? And there are actually some tools, some free tools, at least if you're in the 5-county area around central New York, that are free, that are available. But I'm happy to talk with anyone who's looking for ideas. So these are good examples. I'm not going to go through all these, but you can take a look at these and get a sense. There are people who talk about strategies for this, and I know because this is Zoom, I figured I wouldn't zoom in too much, but you can see that they talk about measuring at the top part activities, attendance, and things like that, and quality of service. Those are outputs. Then they move into short-term outcomes, cognitive change, right? Think of something. This is what schools do all the time. Did a person learn something from pre to post, right? That's your Regents exams and things like that, right? You've got affective change, right? I used to think that drugs were cool, and now I think they're not. The DARE program, right? Now, is it possible that can get wrong? It actually could, because the early evaluations of DARE, even though they had the Stingray and they had the really cool Corvette, they studied it. DARE to keep kids off drugs was the program, and I'm just not talking out of school, to sort of quote the research. It said, what happened after kids were in those programs? And it turned out that actually, wow, they did more drugs, right? And so when you look at that, you realize, all right, it's not that keeping kids off drug is a bad proposition. That's a worthy thing to do. The way we're doing it isn't quite working. Maybe we're introducing kids to drugs they didn't know about, right? And kind of figuring that out. So affective change is that change in attitude. And then the key thing is behavior change, right? After this program, I got a job. I kept a job. And just on the news yesterday, they're talking about the methadone clinic, and they're having different approaches. One was they say, no drugs right away, and we're going to, and the only measure is drug, whether you're clean of drugs. But another approach that was competing said, you know what, we're going to be flexible and help you get off this slowly. And what was interesting was the behavior that was changing wasn't actually. They weren't necessarily getting fully off drugs, but they were able to sort of manage that in a certain way where they were able to actually help out and get a job, acquire a car, have a home. So there was interesting things. So you really got to be careful about exactly and what exactly your changes are, right? And be specific about it, because sometimes it could be not the one you set out to achieve, but something that's kind of related. And then you've got long-term changes with organizational and programmatic, and I'll get into that later. But I just want to let you know that there are things out there that kind of give you, it's a sort of a cheat sheet. And when you think about, well, do we want to change knowledge? Do we want to change people's attitudes or their behavior? And so there's a little bit of zoom in there. And oftentimes, if you're going to change cognitive, you're going to do some sort of a test of knowledge. You're going to say, can you do this skill now versus could you do it before? A pre-test, post-test. If you're going to do affective change, you're going to ask people about their perception, their attitudes, right? So this is sort of a foreshadowing to later in the program where we talk about surveys, and there's a lot of ways to survey, and that is a very helpful tool. And then altered behavior. You look at actual observations and even self-reported. Did they actually change what they're doing? Did they actually quit smoking? That kind of thing. So if you're into karate or the martial arts, you might think of these are the areas of that you're going to karate chop with your program, or these are the areas you're going to help: knowledge, attitudes, awareness, and motivation. And so, just to quote Peter York here, oftentimes, and he's somebody who is in the field studying nonprofits. The goal is no longer homelessness or eliminating disease. And he's going to reiterate something that I kind of shared earlier. Such goals are inspirational. They absolutely are. They are almost always beyond the direct reach, though, of a single intervention or program. It is more realistic, for example, to measure whether clients in a program to help the homeless actually follow through with a job referral or a doctor's appointment, right? These are the initial steps. Such goals may sound less inspiring, but actually represent a significant achievement. And I'll add in here, right? This is where you pull in the literature and say, if you do that, you're on the path to recovery, right? This is where you pull in that other literature. This is where you pull in all of academia. Academia is your friend. All that research is your friend. Pull that in and cite it and say, these are the precursors. These are the foreshadowers. These are the predictors of that type of behavior. And as he further says, this is kind of saying they're smart goals, which is what that slide said earlier. They are building blocks for achieving broader social change 1% at a time, and they are within reach, right? That means they're smart. They're the building blocks. So thank you, Peter. All right, so being realistic is key there, right? And so here's an example of KPI framework you might use. And we're getting ready for a quiz, right? When it starts getting simpler in the presentation, quiz is coming. So the area, you've got your area, your output metric, your outcome metric, and your strategic alignment. So you've got, for instance, you have a program reach would be the number of participants. That importantly is an output, right? It's like a robot number of people served, right? But oh my gosh, my mind is just blown by this art exhibit, this art program that you did. Now I can't wait. I'm just excited about life, excited about a career in the arts, right? That is an outcome metric, right? The percent showing improvement. So maybe that's affective, right? Oh, your perspective on the arts, your perspective on STEM. I used to hate numbers and biology. It seems so boring, but now I can't wait to work in a factory that makes space for computers and phones, right? So that's a change or an improvement. That's the change. So that's an example of an output versus an outcome, and that's aligned in this case, perhaps with your community engagement. How many people you're bringing into this concept, right? This idea of art or this community engaging people about STEM. Fundraising, dollars raised is an output. Number of donors retained, right? Because that's a long term. If you're in fundraising, you're trying to win people over, then keep them, then lift them, right? You donated once, you heard of lie buns and side buns. You donated last year, but not this year. Side buns some year, but not this year. You want to gain them over and then keep them given every year and then elevate their gift. You gave $10 last time. Could you give 25? So that donor retain might be this long-term metric, right? It's more long-term looking. Advocacy, number of events you have. I'm having events about lead poisoning and making sure you test your home, make sure it's clean of lead. And then the metric might be, well, we're actually going to create a policy, right? To make sure that if you are going to rent a home, it has to be on a rental registry, and it has to be dust swiped for lead before any children move in. Sound familiar? It does if you're from Syracuse. All right, so mission impact. So you're going to sort of be protecting these children, and you're having financial stability and engaging the community in your mission. So I think we are ready for a quiz. So I can rest my voice. The scanner is right there. Which of the following is not an outcome? Which of the following is an outcome, not an output? So here we're looking to see can you tell the difference between an outcome and an output? And it's sometimes tricky. If you're in fundraising, you might think of this slightly differently than if you're in designing programs. But what people often care about is your ability to deliver when it comes to those key outcomes for community. And once we do this, we're going to start shifting a little bit more concretely into, all right, let's pick some. Let's look at some examples. Now that you know the difference between an outcome or output, hopefully, it's looking like you do, right? And the majority do. That the percent showing improvement is a good example of an outcome. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one. So now that you say, all right, we want outcomes. We're not going to go through this whole chart. Put it in there mostly so you can refer to it. There are different levels at which you could have outcomes. You can have it at individual levels for specific clients. You can have outcomes at organizational levels, like the whole organization is improving. You can have outcomes at the inter-organizational level, meaning these organizations are working better together than they used to, or at the whole community level. And that one is probably the thing that's most intuitive, like, oh my gosh, the graduation rates are improving in our community, right? And so let's get into them. So let's see if we can figure out which one this is. Actually, you can tell because there's a tile right there. It's an example of an individual. This is from something down here. These are all local examples, right? These are the percent of children ready for kindergarten as assessed by letter naming fluency, which is how many letters you can name in a certain amount of time, which is a predictor of ability to read over time. And so what you can see here is not in the program is on the left, and consistently in the program is on the right. And hopefully you can see that the individuals in the program on average are doing much better with that score in terms of 61% of those are ready for kindergarten versus only 46% are not ready for kindergarten. And so just something there to point out, funders, donors, we don't expect it to be 0 and 100, right? That's not real life. This is an example of real life. This comes from an academic journal. Here's another example. Maybe your outcome is having to do with a training program. And so this is a person's ability to use Microsoft Excel, which you saw in the previous presentation, or use a logic model, which we'll get to, or a pivot table, or using Microsoft Access, something like that. You can have a pre-score on the left and a post-score on the right, and then your percent increase. That's another example of an individual performance. And this is an example of self-reported. The previous was an example of an actual test that was administered. Or an organizational level, and I know that you're closer to your screen than I am close to this screen, but here you can see that these are different best practices of an organization. And this is after organizations went through a training program and they had multiple staff from that organization. And what you can see is that the number of, or the percentage improvement in those different functional areas. And this one is very similar to that cycle that I showed you earlier, like looking at needs, developing measures for the approaches to address those needs in the community, and then solving those. So this example, this one might be a little easier to see. This is performance analysis and program adjustments. This is comparing ourselves to others. So if this comes from McKinsey or Kinsey. There are two different, one of those is a consultant firm, the other one was a researcher who was kind of controversial. And if you know it, you're probably chuckling to yourself. I can't remember, but I think it's
McKinsey capacity.
McKinsey, thank you. All right, so McKinsey is the group. And so this one is, are they comparing their organizations to others? Are they comparing, incorporating data into decision-making, or are they measuring performance, comparing ourselves over time, right? So these are organizational level performance improvements. Another one could be organizations that are having to delay funding or delay programs due to funding and things like that. So this would be another example. Are those the number of organizations that are having to scale down their services? Are those decreasing? All right, what does it look like for interorganizational? Here's a partnership between the county, a literacy coalition, and a lead coalition, where the county is providing data on high neighborhoods of lead poisoning. The literacy coalition is working to look whether children that are signing up for their book distribution program in those are in neighborhoods with high lead poisoning, and then asking those families, hey, you're in an area of high lead poisoning. Is it okay if we refer you to the lead coalition? If they say yes, then the lead coalition is saying, all right, well, we'll walk you through how to test your home before your child gets poisoned. This is an example of interorganizational working together. So what does a KPI look like here? It might look like referrals, right? And so how many children are being referred? How many people are getting their homes tested? How many kids are having lead poisoning prevented, right? So this is an example. I'm going to show you a series now of, all right, so what does this look like? We're moving from KPIs in theory, as you've seen, into measure. And one thing that I like to point out is it should be kind of easy to measure. It's easy to read a chart. You can see from this, you might not know what this is, this referrals, but you can see if it's in the red, it's probably bad, right? And you can see, oh my gosh, July and September weren't so great. We didn't have a lot of referrals. If it's in the green, it's pretty good. And if you look to the right, you can sort of see things like baseline changes. How much better are we than the initial starting point? So there's an example of that. Here's an example of that last level, the community level. And this is third grade reading. Remember I mentioned that that's in some places, some people say it's an urban myth, but I actually heard Governor John Hickenlooper, I was in Colorado, and he said, he was former governor of Colorado, said, governors are looking at third grade reading in order to forecast how many prisons we're going to need, right? And so, it's a meaningful outcome, right? If you're not reading on third grade level, you're probably not going to graduate from high school and such. and we're going to need more prisons, which is a scary thought. And so there's an example of community need, and you can see this is our community here, Syracuse City, which was very low, 2014, etc. And you can kind of see it going up, trying to catch up to the county after some interventions. Here's an example of that same thing on a live dashboard. And you can see, you might say, there's a story behind the curve. Here's where stories are important. Well, what happened in 2020, 2021, 2022? There was a pandemic, right? So third grade reading really went down. And so good news is 2025 numbers are up to 27%. So we are back on track and going up. But so that's an example. You see that with the green is on the top, right? And so when you're thinking about how to measure these, and that's part of what we're moving into this section on, well, how do I measure these? We'll point that out as a best practice. Make it so it's really easy to understand. You can tell that higher is better because higher is greener, right? On this one though, lower is better. This is lead poisoning. This is 2 census tracts in Syracuse, right? This is we're looking to see whether children, the percent of children who have elevated blood lead levels. That means they've been poisoned by lead, right? And so you could see in 2020, wow, it was pretty high. And you can see it moving down to yellow, and you can see what this group has decided. Well, success is 10%. I mean, obviously, 0 is always going to be preferable. But what would be success for this initiative? And maybe we need to do something else. But keeping things tracked this way, is an example of how to do your KPIs, where people can rally around it and get really excited about, oh my gosh, the number, it's still in the red, but we can see the current trend is moving in the right direction. It went down 3%, right? Which is the way we want to see it going. So there's an example. So strengthening impact this strengthens the impact of your storytelling. When you pair this together, and you can see here that in these, you see on the very bottom of this chart is a story behind the curve. You always want to tell that story. You want to say, well, this is what was happening. It allows you to elevate the stories from, there's this one child, right, which is who was from a refugee family. They got out of war. They fled. They had to leave all their belongings and loved ones behind, and they got all the way to, they made to Kenya for a while, and they had to live there for a few years, and they finally got the note that they're coming to Syracuse. Wow, that's wonderful. And then they showed up, and then they're in the land of opportunity, and then they all got lead poisoning. And like, oh my gosh, what a heartbreaking story. That's the individual story, right? And that's important to tell. But then you're going to be saying, well, listen, in that neighborhood, there's a lot of lead poisoning, and this is what we're doing in that neighborhood. We're helping families like them, right? And it allows you to tell the story, but also when you saw the pandemic, to sort of give the story behind why this is happening across a bunch of people. Well, the pandemic hit and we weren't able to do this, or there was a housing shortage, so we weren't able to do this. So that story is also very important. So we're going to be moving into sort of, so combines the data with human stories is very important. It allows you to do this on this meta level, not just the individuals, but also on the trends in the community. Using visuals to make tangible impact, right? Those charts hopefully give you a sense of whether we've got momentum, we've got the wind behind our backs, we're improving, or if we are so far off that we are not going to actually, we're not going to make any change here. And you see 2 examples there where they are actually having positive improvement. Highlighting measurable change is very important. It's important so donors can say, you know what, I want to bring that to 0. If you were, think about this, have you ever been to Saratoga racetrack or any racetrack, and you see horses? Imagine you didn't have to bet at the beginning. Imagine you could bet halfway through the race. All right. Imagine you could do that. Would you take the opportunity? Why wouldn't you, right? If the goal is to win money, or in this case, to help children not be poisoned by lead. So are you more likely to pitch in and put your money in if you already see your horses in the head? Yeah, right. So if your team or your horse has got a running start and it's doing well, it brings in more money, right? People want to be on that momentum, especially if you're not into the green zone yet, right? If you can see, we're not to the goal, but we have the wind at our backs. We are doing the right thing. What we're doing is working. We need your resources. People are more likely to jump in, including funders. So highlighting measurable change is very, very important. And then telling stories for the audience. I'm going to give you an example in a moment here with some of these charts where we actually are able to drill down to specific electoral neighborhoods and things like that. So when you're going to an elected official and they used to be called pork or pork barrel legislation, now it's called congressionally directed funds, right? So those kind of earmark type things. Hey, this is a big thing in your jurisdiction. Can you help us out with that, right? And then that becomes helpful. It helps everyone. It helps their clients. It helps the audience, the people you're trying to serve in their district. So choose simple charts. I hope those seem simple to you. They seem simple to me. Over complex ones, highlight trends and changes. which I was trying to do, keep labels clear and concise and use consistent colors. Red should always be bad. Green should always be good. Yellow somewhere in the middle, right? So use things that people learn with driving, things like that. All right, another thing, there are tools out there. You can geocode things very quickly and free. Batch geo is something that I was showing somebody the other day. You can put a bunch of addresses in there and code them. And so geography is very important. We live our lives in geographies, right? Donors do too, board members do too. They want to be able to see where that impact is being made, see that neighborhood. So geography is very, very important, very, very helpful. And so to summarize, before we kind of go into a few more examples, right? You're wanting to link KPIs to your mission and vision. You want to report progress regularly. And to do that, you want easy systems. What percent of time should you spend measuring this data and putting it into charts? Not more than 10%. Really don't spend more than 10% of your organization's time measuring these KPIs, right? It should be the lower the better, right? As long as they're meaningful. So you want to report it regularly. You want to have it just kind of churning out. You want to spend most of your time, 90% of your effort, making the needle move, 10% measuring the needle, right? If you think of it as a needle on an odometer. So adjusting strategies based on results, that's why you want to do it. You want to be able to look at these things in real time and make changes. That's why we call it a dashboard. If you think of a dashboard on your car, if you see that gas meter going into E, you take action, you pull over. You see the engine heat going up too high, you pull over, right? You let it cool down. Maybe that's just my car. Anyway, so you communicate alignment to funders and board, and you show them how you're doing this, and you pull this in, right? Because you have the wisdom of crowds. You're leveraging then your board's insights, so they can actually say, all right, I can speak macro. I'm not going to get in the weeds, right? And they say a good story rule of thumb for board members is what is it? Eyes in, fingers out, something like that, right? Take a look at what make sure you can see what's doing, but don't meddle. Right. And this is a way that you can really bring board members in and have them participate and leverage their knowledge and really give your organization your all. So we're going to kind of round out here with some tools, right? We mentioned logic models. We mentioned dashboards and scorecards, surveys, assessments, and CRM or data management systems. We're just going to talk about these. This is something that the Central New York Community Foundation helps organizations with, and we're happy to give free advice on this. So you can always reach out to us. What kind of system should I build? Oftentimes you're like, oh my gosh, I got a new grant. It's for a year. Should I invest in a system that's going to take me 12 months to 6 months to implement? No, right? You should look for a cheaper one, right size. And so we can give you tips on that. So let's talk about this. What is a logic model? Logic model is part of a 3-stage process. A lot of this is going to start to seem like review because it is. We're taking what we built on earlier and we're just kind of giving you examples as we kind of phase out of this presentation, right? You start with the community need. Oh, a lot of people need that, whatever that red thing is. Then you move into a logic model. These are the steps you're going to do. This is the action you're going to take. So this kind of cycle is a sub part of that other cycle that you saw earlier. Then you assess, see how that kind of connects back in, right? So this is sort of a simplified version of that earlier thing, right? So how do you assess? There's lots of ways to assess. You could do brainstorming. You can conduct surveys. You could do all these interesting things. I threw this in here because it was out of the box. And I thought, you know what? These community forums and other ideas for stakeholders, I thought this would be fun for you to look at on your own time. It's getting kind of close to the weekend. It's hump day. And this could be something you print out maybe and take a look at and then go to their website for the weekend when you're bored. Another thing you might have is a community indicators website in the 5-county area surrounding Central New York. We have CNY Vitals. It's 100% free. You might look at this and say, oh my gosh, this number is, who's the biggest group living in poverty? Oh my gosh, it looks to be females at that age, which I can't see without, I must need corrective lenses for this distance.
18 to 24.
Thank you, 18 to 24. Thank you, see that. So this might be how you identify need. The need is among women who are 18 to 24. That's who we're going to serve, right? So you use data to start that out. You might say, oh my gosh, the population living in poverty is increasing, or the population living in poverty is worse in these areas, the darkest blue. You can see all this on CNY Vitals. Or your need may be specific to certain groups. You might say, you know what, there are equity gaps. And this is if in Onondaga County, if you would compare the incidence of some of these good and bad things this was done for Blacks and whites in Onondaga County. So the first one, life expectancy. Black residents in Onondaga County, their life expectancy is 93% of whites. So if it was 100%, they'd be equal. right? So it's less. Graduation rates is 75, 76% of whites, right? So you can see, you can point out disparity, and you can do that with all of these things. So that's an example. Another way, infant mortality, right, is nowhere near 100%, which would be equal. So you could, that's one way. So you start by saying this is the need in the community. Then comes into your logic model, which ties very much into your financial, your resources. What are you going to need? Everything that you need in your audit, in your 990, all the things in your financial statements. That's really the stuff that these resources kind of sketches out. I need staff. I need housing. If you saw that presentation, you're like, oh yeah, we have lighting, and how do I build that? Right? Is that a fixed cost? Is that is that a step cost? Whatever. Those resources are all going to be in your budget, but you kind of, you talk about them here, then you talk about what activities, right? This is where you kind of plan a program well before it kind of works its way into your books, right? When you're just thinking of a program, you figure out what activities or services am I going to provide? What are the outputs? How many people am I going to serve? And how are they going to like the service, right? If you go to a hotel, the outputs are how many people came, how many people showed up to the hotel, and two, did you like the service? They give you a little survey. Did you like the pool? How was the service? That's an output, not an outcome. The outcome is whether you come back, right? It's the repeat service, right? And so you have short-term outcomes, and then long-term outcomes is going to be like, wow, this hotel is so popular. We're going to build more of them, and the impact. That's what people often start with. That's the ending homelessness. That's the ending poverty, and that's where you have to oftentimes use the literature to jump from the outcomes to the impact, right? So there's a chronology often to this, the short-term outcomes and long-term, something that happens first, that's your leading indicator, and something else that's a lagging indicator. You might, if you follow US data trends or the economy, you say, the consumer spending is a leading indicator for stock prices, right? And so you've got a leading indicator. If that goes up, this is probably going to go up later. That's a lagging indicator. So that's kind of what a short-term and long-term outcomes are. All right, so time for a quiz. All right, hopefully you paid attention there. Which of the following is not a component of a logic model? We just showed you a logic model. Granted, you didn't fill it out, but let's see if you can figure out which one of these is not part of it. Is the resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, impact, or is it time-bound? What is it? We're almost done, right? Okay. So after this, I think the rest is just going to be just pointing out. You can take a look at those slides. So there's just good places to get fantastic examples to dream about these things.
A question did come in too that I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
So we'll cover that quick.
Okay, and people got it right. The time bound is time bound is not part of it. The other parts were all part of a logic model.
All right, so I want to ask you this question that came in. It actually came in during Peggy and Angela's presentation, but I thought, with the Community Foundation, this might be a good question for you. So there's a lot of the time, grants are not covering enough of the admin salaries, and organizations are struggling on how to either fight for more dollars to help cover some of those costs, and they want to know how better to portray this to donors and funders to try to leverage some more of those dollars. Is there any suggestions you have to those small organizations that are really struggling to put on a program, but also make sure all their wages are covered under those?
Yeah, I think that's a great, and I can see why that came in during the past presentation where, we're saying, how should we allocate it? 100% the program, because that's what donors want to see. Yeah. The idea is that, and that it could be an example of a poor PMI. Remember we said sometimes KPIs, key performance measures or indicators, can lead you in the wrong direction. If it is the lowest overhead possible, if people are mistaking that as an example that you're thinking initially, that means more money going to the program, but actually you do need the staff to do the program, right? So it's misleading, and it could lead to not investing in your staff, high turnover, all sorts of things, and it's not the same as the outcome. So it's a good example of taking an output and kind of elevating that as an outcome and making decisions based on a KPI that could be helpful, right? You don't want to have overly bloated. There were some places in the news that were spending too much on their executives, right? And we heard about those, and that led to, it's sort of like a pendulum, right? Shifting toward, oh my gosh, we got to reduce overhead. But now I think the pendulum's shifting back where we realize, you know, you really do need staff to carry these out. And it makes a big difference whether your staff have been there for 4 months or 14 years. And the 14-year staff really do have institutional knowledge. And so making that case, again, it's always going to come down to the KPMI. What is that key measure? What is that thing that we can do better than anyone else and that we're doing? Here's the trend of how we're doing. Here is the, here's how we're measuring it. And here's what it costs. And so that really connects there. But you should not be ashamed to invest in your staff, to send them professional development. Definitely funders are seeing that more and more. We at the Community Foundation actually do have programs to send your staff to training and have been pushing more and more for professional development, because investing in our staff, you know, that is really the number one asset. And you want to make sure you don't miss out on that by trying to get the bottom line lower.
I knew you'd give a good answer for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we missed one polling question, so
Oh,
I
okay.
think there may be one more.
Here's one, because I was slow or fast. I know slow is the answer. So these are all just great ideas. Results First Clearinghouse, go there if you're looking for ways to measure. We're going to talk about more dashboards and what you like about them, what you don't like about them. These are local dashboards. Remember I mentioned there's one where you can actually say, oh, to your legislator, oh, this is how many people are enrolled in your program. This is a free system that's available in Syracuse area. These are something called results-based accountability, which also has a free tool. If you want to check out their website, they have a free tool, results scorecard. And here's an example of a logic model that has all those tools kind of put in there. And the question was here's the question. Which of the following is true? The more measurement is better. Stories don't matter, just the hard numbers and data, just the hard numbers data. It doesn't matter when you collect your data, things seldom change, and people need help putting your analysis into the broader context. So which of these is true? I think in the things that we covered, hopefully that's clear. I think I hit it pretty hard, but it was a while ago.
And we are going to provide all these slides to the audience, so they're going to be able to see all those metrics that you've provided and all those really good slides. So fear not.
They are to really just help you dream. Now, if you're having trouble going to sleep, look at some of those metrics, print those out this weekend too, and just kind of look and say, oh, and see if you can figure out what they are without explanation, and then see if they help you dream. All right, and you got it. Nice way to go out. So people need help putting your analysis into the broader context. They do. So data moves the head and stories move the heart. So just remember that, and hopefully that'll help you, and always happy to talk more. Thank you.